Thank you, Valentina. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Did I hop in okay? Am I
You're
live?
all here. You're all ready to go. I'll be right here whenever you need me.
Okay, thank you. I need that reassurance because I'm pretty nervous. I just something about this platform, this new platform makes me a little nervous. When you're legally blind like myself, you just sort of expect accessibility barriers everywhere, right? Unfortunately it's sort of the norm when it comes to new platforms, and Lord knows we always have a new software solution. Every couple of weeks it seems like there's some new software solution, some new productivity piece of some tool. So it is more important than ever that we talk about accessibility. In order to do that, I'm going to share my screen with you all. So give me one moment here and I'll show you what we're seeing on my screen. Yeah, why not? Here, folks, this, to give you a sense, is how I use my computer. Now, what you're seeing right now is me jumping around on the screen with Zoom. And this is something that's built into the Mac, and I use this to read text because I can't read text unless I blow it up to be this big, right? So that's kind of gives you a sense of how I'm using my computer screen. Everybody uses their computers and their technology differently. And it's incredible that with an Apple computer, because of their dedication to universal design, anyone, whether or not it's someone like me who is legally blind, someone who's completely blind, someone who's deaf, can pull out the technology and start using it the way it was intended. Now, I'm going to save you the seasickness of having to actually follow along with that sort of zooming around. And I'm just going to switch over to share only my presentation. But I wanted to give you that as sort of a backdrop of how I'm navigating my computer screen as a blind person. Now, I'm assuming everyone can see this, and I just want to double check. Valentina, can everyone see this right now? I'm going to assume the best here.
Yes, everyone can see it. Everyone can hear you. We are all good.
Okay, cool. And if I switch screens, you can still see it, it looks like. Okay, great. So yeah, accessibility. This is, we have a little joke in the accessibility community that accessibility is just about the least accessible word you could possibly come up with to describe what you do. It is incredibly difficult to spell. It's difficult to wrap your mind around. And for people with certain disabilities, it's actually physically hard to read. Now, like that's a fun joke, but it's actually a real issue. So that's the reason that earlier this year, at Be My Eyes, we started a new podcast called 13 Letters. And of course, it's a joke about the number of letters in the word accessibility, but moreover, it's about breaking down the field of digital inclusion and physical inclusion into physical spaces into smaller parts, into concepts that people can understand. And moreover, putting a human face on our practice of making products and services more accessible. So I didn't kick this off just to plug my podcast. I kicked it off to draw your attention to a friend of mine who you can learn more about if you listen to the podcast. But I wanted to use her as an example because she sort of embodies what we're talking about here. So this is Haben Verma. Haben is first generation, grew up in Oakland, child of Ethiopian immigrants, and also happens to, has had an incredible career. She has, she graduated from school, went to Harvard Law, became a really accomplished civil rights attorney in the field of disability rights, And she also happens to be deafblind, right? So whatever modern day perceptions you may have about Helen Keller or sort of the plight or the struggle or the success of someone like that, Haben is sort of a modern day embodiment of what you can achieve when accessibility is factored into what you do. Now, Haben benefited from a lot of incredible technology and a lot of super helpful mentors and people in her life that allowed her to strive and become the first ever deafblind graduate of Harvard Law. But I also don't want to make it seem like this was just handed to her, because Haben had to innovate. And one of the things that Haben found, the title of her new book is The Deafblind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law. And that's not really a misnomer, because truly, when you come to a college situation or a new work situation, there are always going to be accessibility barriers, and there aren't always going to be people there who are willing to help you knock them down. And so whether or not we are talking about being a person with a disability who's trying to overcome these barriers for yourself, or whether we're talking about being an ally to someone with a disability, or maybe you're managing a community where you want to improve accessibility, you have to be willing to try things and innovate and test things out on your own. The best example is the way that Haben communicates with other people. This is something that she completely invented on her own. When you walk into a room with Haben, she hands you a Bluetooth Apple keyboard. You type on the keyboard and it sends a message to a wireless Bluetooth Braille display that refreshes in real time under her fingertips. She reads the message you're sending her, and then she talks back to you in spoken English. Now, this is not like a communicative system that some accessibility expert somewhere handed to her. This is her own invention. And so I want to encourage you all, as we're talking about disability and accessibility, to not be intimidated and feel like, oh, this is their community, I'm in my community, I don't have some lived experience of disability, so I don't have the right to be. I want people to feel like they have the power and the permission to innovate. And if the solution isn't readily apparent or readily available, to find a solution, because this is something that people with disabilities have been doing for eons and will continue to do going forward. So the next thing I want to show you all is a little table I put together before this presentation to try to debunk the myth of disability. I don't know if we can completely disassemble medical and societal notions of disability in the next 3 minutes, but we're going to give it a shot. On the left side of the column here, you'll see what are traditionally thought of as traditional categories of disabilities. This is, for those who aren't looking at it, this is a table I've created with, it's about a 5x4 table with all these different things written in the grid. Vision disabilities, hearing disabilities, cognitive, mobility, motor, even emotional impairments of some type, or things that affect you. But on the other axis, we have the factors that create or manifest in disability. So is it a lifelong disability? There's another column for acquired disability, or maybe just a temporary disability, or shorter than temporary, just situational, or perhaps it's chronic and recurring. So what I'm trying to show here is that if you look across this table and just sort of scan it, you see everything from what we think of as, real quote unquote disabilities, cerebral palsy, or blind since birth, or something like that, all the way to things that people who would consider themselves non-disabled find to be pretty relatable. So what about carrying a young child, or carrying heavy bags, holding a baby, earwax, sun glare, dry eye. Maybe you have chronic anxiety or bunions on your feet. Maybe that might result in a mobility impairment. my point in kind of tossing all of these different, very, very human conditions at you is to break down the notion a little bit that disability is a specific group of people, and that it's not something that every single one of us is going to, has, and will experience in our lives. And the notion that accessibility is somehow this niche accommodation that's made for people who are different than ourselves. And every one of us can look at a group that we see more on the left side of this table and feel pity for them, or feel like understand the charity model or something like that. But then as you start to move to the right side of the column, you realize, well, any of us could be in that category. Any of us could be in the category of needing accessibility. If you're holding a baby in one arm, then you have the exact same accessibility needs as someone with a motor impairment that only allows them to use one arm, or someone who is rehabilitating themselves from a stroke. If you perhaps are a young child trying to use a product that was intended for you, you might have the same cognitive capacity as someone with a developmental or intellectual disability. And the thing that's true about both of those groups is they should both be able to use the product if it's designed for them. So I'm just trying to kind of like stretch and expand everyone's notion a little bit of who your community is. Because every single one of these people in this table here could be, and probably is, a part of your community. They just may not be identifying. So let me take you through another concept about how to get to accessibility, because I very, very much understand that, especially with it being such a long 13-letter word, it can be very daunting if you don't know anything about the standards and the best practices and all this stuff. How do you actually make your company, make your community more inclusive to people with disabilities, especially if you don't have that lived experience and you don't feel like you have the right to assume anything about them? So when we coach people through this at Be My Eyes, and when we help companies become more accessible, particularly with regards to supporting the blind and visually impaired community, we like to show them this little pyramid. And I like to call it my great pyramid of inclusion. But it's sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs or something like that. The idea being that accessibility is a process. It's a journey, not a destination, right? Some people say it's a program, not a project. However you want to look at it, getting to full inclusion, getting to accessibility, it's just never going to happen. Accessibility, inclusion, like perfection, is an ideal, and 100% doesn't really exist. But it's an ideal worth striving toward, right? So as you try to sit at the very peak of that pyramid, here's some things you can do. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, specific examples about how you can do that. But it starts with basic stuff. At the ground level, it's about supporting your consumers, supporting your community. So figuring out, okay, our community has a large proportion of people who are aging, which means they're hard of hearing. Well, maybe we should start, looking into best practices for captioning and for transcription support. Simple step, but it addresses a symptom. Basically, it's addressing the symptoms of accessibility barriers. Then as you move up, you start doing bigger things, right? As you start supporting your community, you start kind of getting buy-in, and you start intertwining your values with your community's values. You can change the culture at your organization. There's things like you can do volunteering programs, there's talks you can give, you can kind of give internal, really kind of like paying a little extra attention to having some of those tough conversations that change culture internally, which then cause people to think before they create something that eventually has a barrier within it. As you start to be successful at changing the culture of your company, you can start looking outward, boosting public awareness, sharing your success stories, and saying, look at what we achieved when we started supporting our consumers and changing the culture. Then it's when it starts to get really interesting. Unemployment rates amongst the disability community are incredibly high, staggeringly high. I think amongst the blind community, we're talking about like a 70% unemployment rate. So, that's a nice sort of matchup to improving the accessibility of your product, because the best possible way you can improve the accessibility of your products and really bake inclusiveness into the culture of your company is to hire people with disabilities and hire them for important jobs. So once you have someone like, my previous company, there wasn't a culture of inclusion. But as soon as someone with a white cane, like I use, starts walking around the halls, or as soon as someone who says, hey, actually, we need to use Google Hangouts for this meeting because I use the live captioning on it. As soon as someone says that, it has an incredible ripple effect of the company. People start thinking differently about things. So, and it also has the effect of boosting employment amongst the disability community. Once you've achieved these first 4 levels, that's when you're really getting your community towards being inclusive. And once you have people who actually work in kind of rank and file, thinking every day, relating to some experience they had, whether it was a campaign from your marketing department or a just sort of a volunteering experience, or maybe they're a frontline customer support employee, or they're a community manager who read a comment on Facebook that really took them to heart. That's when you start having really weaving accessibility into the fabric of your company, so that when products are born and communities are born, they're actually born accessible. And that's ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal. But you can't start at the top. So a little bit about what Be My Eyes does. We are the sort of the community support platform for the blind community all around the world. What we provide is very, very simple. We have a video chat app that allows a blind person to press a button and in a matter of seconds have someone with a pair of eyes looking through their camera and helping them with whatever they need help with. We link people up with a wide network of volunteers. So we have almost, I think, 3.7 million volunteers. And we link people up with companies. So if you're a company, you can join the Be My Eyes platform to support the blind community with whatever area of expertise you provide. So for instance, we have Google and Microsoft supporting with tech support. We have Clearblue, a pregnancy and home fertility test company, supporting with their products. Anything that you can imagine someone might need a pair of eyes for, whether it's an expert pair of eyes or a volunteer pair of eyes, Be My Eyes is sort of the hub that allows people to connect and support one another. And we often joke sometimes that we may be helping the volunteers more than the blind users, because the volunteers enjoy volunteering so much, and the feedback we get is just so ecstatic. Like, really, open my eyes up to a whole new experience and things I never thought about before. And that's why today we have 3.7 million sighted volunteers, more than 210,000 blind users in practically every country and language you can imagine. So as you can imagine, we've been getting a lot of inquiry about corporate volunteering programs since COVID, and we've been really kind of like collaborating a lot with companies to work on that second stage of the pyramid of changing culture and using volunteering as a way to change the culture in a meaningful way. And then, of course, supporting with our tools is sort of the baseline of the pyramid. It's really, really cool to see the types of things people, like if you're a Be My Eyes volunteer, you're going to get a window into the life of a blind person who's encountering accessibility barriers left and right. Your phone's going to buzz, maybe every couple weeks, maybe every couple months. It depends on what language you speak and where you are. But they're going to need help with something like just reading a label, reading a food label, distinguishing between a purple sweater and a blue sweater, help figuring out, which one of these is the shampoo and which one of these is the conditioner, all the way to like much more technical things like, I need help setting a thermostat, or I need help, reinstalling my disk image on my Windows 10 operating system, which is why we have specialized help partners like Microsoft. So But my goal today is not so much to talk about Be My Eyes, but to give everyone here some ideas for how they can make their communities more accessible and how to not make it feel like it's so daunting. So I tried to simplify it. Again, this is just the beginning. This is just sort of like the thing to get you thinking. And I'm happy to send these slides around and post them. I failed to post them somewhere public, but I promise I will do that. And this shouldn't be that hard to remember. When you are building a community experience, an event, a product, a launch, a campaign, ask yourself a few simple things. Make sure you do a few simple things. The first one is don't assume. And that goes back to that grid that I showed you all earlier, right? Don't assume you know who your community is and you know whether or not they have a disability, right? I was talking to Beth from CMX about, putting this event together. And when you put out a request for, does anyone need accommodations? You might only get 1 out of 100 people saying, well, yes, I do. But that might be a lot of, yeah, I see I'm just a couple more minutes here. So that might be a lot to assume. So don't assume that people don't need the accommodations, and try to figure out what it is that people might actually need. The other thing is to ask early, because when you ask too late in the process, it's often is too late. Like for instance, Hopin. I have no idea what the level of accessibility of Hopin is, but if I had been a screen reader user or perhaps someone else, it could be possible that I wouldn't even be able to get in and give my presentation today. Because the delivery platform, everything had already been decided. There's other things on this checklist which are obvious, like consult experts, and really it can sometimes just mean Googling it. There are so many well-established ways to do captions, to do description, all sorts of things. And you really can find the resources out there just by simply looking it up. And this goes back to Haben. The fourth thing is invent new solutions. At the end of the day, it's about getting people the information they need and getting it to them at the same time and as equally as possible as everyone else. So if you come up with a solution, try it out or run it by the person who you're thinking of delivering it towards to see if it works for them. And the final thing is just don't give up, because you're going to encounter barriers. You're going to continue to encounter barriers. And that's just the way it kind of is when you're dealing with a group like of disabilities that tends to be so marginalized in this way. I put a lot of things on here that I think could be useful for everyone, but it's probably not enough time to go into so many details. But there are specific things in each column of this pyramid that really can be done. Captions can be done. Description can be done. Changing culture is about having difficult conversations. Public awareness is about soliciting feedback and being ready to listen when the community opens up and maybe says, hey, that campaign was not quite right on or insensitive. Hiring disabilities is not just about hiring people, but it's about hiring them to do important jobs and not just to do the thing that you assume they can do. And then finally, that's what leads you to making sure your products and experiences are accessible. So I had to kind of run through this. I packed a lot of material in here, and I want to be sure to share my slides. But if anyone has any questions, if we have time, I'd be happy to answer them.
So yes, we do have one question here that's been asked by multiple people. It was asked by Suraya. I hope I've said that right. She's asking you, how do you find Hopin as a platform in terms of accessibility? Because she'd love to look into it for book share and diagram community events. And also Marissa is also interested in your answer too.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of like being able to test the platform thoroughly for accessibility is sort of like it's a job, right? And I probably couldn't tell you, like, just from looking at it, kind of looking at the skin, whether or not it's accessible. My suspicion, though, from like my experience, is that it's like probably midway there. There's probably things they didn't think of, but it doesn't look to be like unsavable, but it's probably it's something that you really need to like take seriously and hire someone to do, and not just kind of like casually assess. Because for all I know, they have a really amazing accessibility team who's put a lot of thought and effort into this, and they could be cringing right now if I'm sort of like slandering the accessibility of their platform. For all I know, it's perfect, right?
Yeah. No, I think with a lot of these platforms that are coming out, they may not have planned to bring these platforms out at this point. And obviously the situation has almost forced them to bring them out earlier. So there's definitely things that aren't quite as perfect as they would like. And I think that every day, even with this event with CMX, we're trying it out to see how we can make a summit-like environment online. And I guess the only thing is we could just learn from different experiences and make notes of what we would do next time.
Yeah, I will say that Zoom has one of the reasons Zoom is so successful is because it was designed with universal design concepts in mind. And Zoom has been the video chat platform of choice for the blind community for like 5 years. Zoom is nothing new for the blind community because it was really notable and remarkable when it came out that it worked so well for everyone. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see the uptake that you did during this time, is because it's universally designed.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I agree. Well, we've run out of time. There is a lot of questions in the chat that I wish we could get through. How can people get in contact with you, Will, to ask you questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry that I had so much content. Please email me at will@bemyeyes.com. I'll send you my slides. I'll send you the checklist. I'll send you everything. And I'll answer any questions you might have just sort of one-on-one. More than happy to do that.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Will, for joining us. Please give Will another virtual standing ovation. Thank you so much.